everyone. Thanks for joining us. We'll start in another minute or so.
Good afternoon. My name is Niyati Shah, and I'm the Assistant Director of Legal Advocacy at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC. Rooted in the dreams of immigrants and inspired by the promise of opportunity, Advancing Justice, AAJC advocates for an America in which all Americans can benefit equally from and contribute to the American dream. Our mission is to advance the civil and human rights of Asian Americans and to build and promote a fair and equitable society for all. Advancing Justice AAJC is a national nonprofit 501c3 founded in 1991 in Washington, D.C. Advancing Justice AAJC is the voice for the Asian American community, the fastest growing population in the United States, fighting for our civil rights through education, litigation, and public policy advocacy. We serve to empower our communities by bringing local and national constituencies together in ensuring Asian Americans are able to participate fully in our democracy. Today, in our Legal Advocacy 101 webinar, I hope to explain the basics of our legal work and suggest some ways that Advancing Justice, AAJC, and your organizations can collaborate to advance our mutual policy goals. Through our Legal Advocacy program, Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC, engages with the courts on a breadth of issues, specifically our core issues, which are the census, immigration, voting rights, and telecommunications. Our legal advocacy efforts include outreach to the broader civil rights community to engage in impactful advocacy through coalition building and joint litigation. Our legal advocacy program advances policy goals in these issues by engaging with the courts. We do this in two ways: amicus briefs and impact litigation. We'll talk about each in greater detail in this webinar. Let's first talk about amicus briefs. An amicus brief is shorthand for amicus curiae brief. In Latin, amicus curiae means friend of the court. And as an amicus or friend, we submit a legal paper called a brief, which informs the court of our position and why we are getting involved in a case. As an amicus, we are not a party or a plaintiff or defendant in the case, but the outcome of this case will nonetheless be important to us in some way. And as such, we are filing a brief with the court to inform the judge why and how we will be impacted. Before we get into the substance of what an amicus brief is, I want to overview the process of filing an amicus brief. First of all, we would need to identify a case that has some importance to us or that will impact our communities of interest. At Advancing Justice AAJC, as I mentioned earlier, our core issues focus on immigration, voting, census, and telecommunications. So we tend to focus on those areas, but we also engage in other areas that may impact the Asian American or AMEMSA communities, such as affirmative action or language access issues. Next, we have to determine a stage in the case when to submit an amicus brief. Usually, it is a stage that will impact the outcome of the case. At the trial court level, that usually means potentially 3 instances. The first possible instance is the PI or preliminary injunction stage. When a PI is sought, that means the party bringing the case is asking the court to stop the defendant's action or conduct during the course of the case, even before the case is decided. For example, in a case involving Chicago's sanctuary city law, the city sought and obtained a PI from the court holding that the Department of Justice cannot force Chicago to give information about immigrants without legal status to ICE agents. This case is still being litigated and no final outcome has been reached. Advancing Justice AAJC filed an amicus brief during that PI stage, and we'll talk a little bit more about the brief and substance a little bit later. Another stage where we can file an amicus brief is the motion to dismiss or MTD stage. At this stage, the defendant argues to the court that even if you believe everything the plaintiff says, they still have not raised a legal argument that is plausible. And lastly, at the trial level, there is the SJM or summary judgment motion, where the court decides whether, as a matter of law, which side is correct. At this stage, some or all of the issues before the court can be decided by the judge. If the judge is unable to do so for any issue or all of the issues, then the case proceeds to trial where evidence is presented, and after weighing the evidence, a judge or jury decides the outcome of the case. In addition to potential stages where we can file an amicus brief at the trial court level, an amicus may also be filed at the appellate level. Appeals from the trial court are taken to the Court of Appeals and then subsequently, if needed, to the final stage, which is the Supreme Court. In order to file an amicus brief, you need permission from the court to do so. In most cases, this permission is liberally granted. When you ask the court for permission, you have to inform the court whether both sides in the case have consented to filing an amicus brief. While their consent is not required, if given, it makes the court's decision much, much easier. But more importantly, you also really want to inform the party on whose side you're filing an amicus brief. That way, if there are any issues or pitfalls ahead, they have the opportunity to inform you. So once you've identified a case and the appropriate stage to file a brief, you draft your brief. You've also asked other organizations whose interests may be aligned with your position to join the brief. Advancing Justice AAJC often sends out requests via email asking your organizations if you would like to join our briefs. By joining the brief, you are letting the court know that this issue matters to you. And the more organizations that join, it shows the court the importance of the case and its outcome. So now that we understand a little bit about the process of filing an amicus brief, let's talk about the brief itself. Generally, the brief will discuss some or all of the points on the screen before you. But I particularly want to talk about 2 aspects that often appear in Advancing Justice AAJC's amicus briefs: organizational experience and individual experiences. In a case where we filed a brief, it dealt with temporary protected status or TPS recipients and their ability to change their status to green card holders. In that case, the government argued that if TPS holders had not been inspected at a port of entry, they couldn't apply for a green card until they were inspected. This meant that in some cases, the individual TPS holder had to go back to their country of origin, which was often in turmoil through violence or natural disaster, and then come back for inspection at a port of entry, even if they had already gotten their TPS status. Our brief showed the organizational experience of one of our community partners, Adhikar, in showing how they helped many Nepali individuals get TPS after the horrendous earthquake there, what kind of thorough vetting the individuals had to go through, and how the government's argument for inspection at a port of entry was nonsense and just an administrative technicality that unfortunately created significant hardship for TPS holders. By using Adhikar's organizational experience, we were able to show the lack of logic in the government's argument using real-world, tangible experiences that are much more powerful than any dry legal argument or scholarly articles alone. Even more powerful, in our brief in the Chicago sanctuary case that I mentioned earlier, we informed the court about the impact of sanctuary city laws and how they help create safe, healthy communities for everyone by detailing the personal experiences of a Pakistani Dhaka PhD student who had unfortunately experienced a live shooter on her campus, but she was afraid to go to law enforcement due to the lack of her legal status. And we also showed the perspective of a former police chief who believes that trust in the authorities are necessary and beneficial to everyone in the community. According to him, crime first starts small against people who will avoid the authorities, but criminals always go bigger and eventually will hit everyone else. If they can be stopped at the outset, that helps everyone. But in order for the police to do that, they have to have the trust of the immigrant community. These individual experiences allow Advancing Justice AAJC to show the court in real and powerful ways how court rulings will impact actual communities on an everyday basis. So now that you know what amicus briefs are and how they work, I want to tell you what you can do to help and participate. The first thing is to share. Share your organization's experiences when Advancing Justice AAJC notifies you about a case we're working on. Often we'll send emails about a brief we're working on. If it's in an issue area that your organization works on, your on-the-ground first-hand knowledge can be super helpful. Also, while we're always on the lookout for cases where we think our voice is warranted, sometimes there's a case that is flying under the radar. If you hear of a case in your neighborhood that you think might benefit from an amicus brief, please share that information with us. It might be possible for us to be involved. Next, you can help us collect stories and connect with individuals that you or your organization helps on a daily basis. Individual experiences are incredibly powerful, and amicus briefs really give the court an opportunity to understand what is at stake. Finally, you can join or sign on to an amicus brief on behalf of your organization. Advancing Justice AAJC will often send out emails asking organizations to sign on to our brief. If the brief is about an issue or topic that your organization works on or would like to support, it's a good idea to sign on. The more organizations that join, the better, because it shows the court that this issue is not going away and that it impacts a lot of communities all over the country. In general, how you join will be detailed in the email we send you. Usually, we'll tell you when we'll have the brief ready, what our deadline to file is, and what your deadline is to sign on. If you decide to sign on, your organization must submit a statement of interest. The statement is about one paragraph that describes your organization and its work and why it may be interested in this case and its outcome. It is not very complicated. We can help you draft it, and many organizations often use the same paragraph from case to case. So now let's talk about the other part of our legal advocacy program, which is impact litigation. Impact litigation is the practice of bringing lawsuits intended to affect societal change or advance policy goals. For example, Advancing Justice AAJC is the attorney for several organizations and individuals who are challenging the addition of the citizenship question in the 2020 census. The citizenship question, against the backdrop of the anti-immigrant rhetoric coming from the administration, can potentially lead to a lot of people not participating in the 2020 census. That is dangerous because an undercount can dilute our voting power and impact the federal funding for roads, healthcare, and other federal programs available locally. So we'll get into what impact litigation is, but you should know that a lawsuit can be an important tool in your organizational's bag, and let's discuss why. First, when is a lawsuit or even the threat of a lawsuit a good idea? Generally, many organizations work for long periods of time trying to effect policy change through grassroots organizing or legislative advocacy or both. But sometimes you have exhausted all your options. This may be a good time to consider whether filing a lawsuit can help you achieve your goal. Another time might be when your state or locality may be about to enact a law or adopt a policy that is bad for your constituencies. A lawsuit might yield faster results than advocacy or organizing alone. Let me give you an example. As many of you may know, federal law allows limited English proficient or LEP voters to take a language assister of their choice with them to the polls. In Minnesota, however, there is a state law that says you can only assist up to 3 voters in marking a ballot per election. Civic engagement organizations there help educate and mobilize voters. One of the services they provide is interpretation and translation. Now, these organizations are stopped from assisting more than 3 voters. Although they've tried for a long time to overturn this law or even just stop it from being fully enforced, they were unsuccessful. Now they have reached out to Advancing Justice AAJC to see if challenging the Minnesota law as non-compliant with federal law in a court can affect the change they're seeking. So you may be wondering now who exactly can bring this kind of lawsuit. You should know that both an individual person or persons can, as well as organizations, can bring a lawsuit as long as they have the standing to do so. Standing is a legal term that means that an individual or an organization has the legal right to bring the defendant or the other side to justice and that has caused you harm or injury. Again, harm and injury are legal terms. Harm or injury can include a drain on your organization's resources. Resources include volunteer time and money or funding. Harm or injury can also include the frustration of your organization's purpose or mission. Going back to the example in Minnesota, here civic engagement groups have to recruit more volunteers and staff to assist voters because each volunteer or staff person is limited to interpreting or translating for only 3 voters per election. This is a drain on their resources. Also, their inability to help voters is a frustration of purpose for a civic engagement organization. So if you feel like you've reached a point where a lawsuit seems like a good idea and you think your organization may be suited to bring a lawsuit, what should you do? First, and perhaps most obvious, talk to a lawyer. Advancing Justice AAJC is available to discuss your options, and in some cases, like in Minnesota, we may decide to represent you ourselves. Sometimes we may refer you to another attorney or organization that can also help. And sometimes, unfortunately, we won't be able to help at all. But if we decide to take on your case, we'll be there every step of the way. We'll discuss what the goals of the lawsuit are, what the risks are, and what your involvement will entail, such as how much time will be needed or any other resources that may be impacted. And generally, our legal representation will be free of charge in most cases. Okay, so we're going to now open it up for questions.
If you'd like to ask a question, you can either use the question box or the chat box, or if you raise your hand, we can unmute your line and you can ask the question. So again, to ask a question, you can either use the question box or the chat box to type in your question, or if you raise your hand, we can unmute your line and you can ask the question. And if there are no questions at this time, you can always email us. We'll be sending out a follow-up email with the recording of this webinar, as well as additional resources. So thank you so much for joining us for this webinar on Legal Advocacy 101, and we look forward.
Oh, wait, we see a question from Abe.
So Abe, we're gonna unmute your line so you can ask your question.
Good afternoon, this is Abe from Tucson, Arizona. I wonder if you can send out the webinar information, not the information but slides, so that we can share it with our partners.
Yeah, definitely. We can send out the slides.
Good, wonderful.
We'll also be posting on our YouTube channel.
Okay.
Yep, so that will be available there.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, as you can see, our contact information is on this screen, and certainly you can reach out also through our website and other social media tools. And please feel free to use this contact information and talk to us if you have any further questions or have any tips you'd like for us to know about.
And we'll be in touch in the upcoming days with the recording of this, as well as the slides and more information. Thank you.